This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 379, the EOWG. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we are talking about the Drupal Event Organizers Working Group with Avi Schwab. Avi is a 14 and a half Drupal years old. In addition to serving as president of the EOWG, he's the lead of MidCamp and the technical product consultant at ImageX, where he's on the team supporting 30 plus YMCA organizations. Avi, welcome to the show and thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm Nick Lapham, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-hosts are John Picozzi, solution architect at EPAM.
Hello, everyone.
Also joining us is Leslie Glynn, customer success manager at Redfin Solutions. Thank you for joining us for the last 4 weeks.
Thanks for having me.
We have one quick update this week. So Drupal 10 is officially out. There was a Drupal 10 launch party that I was able to join for about 5 minutes. Unfortunately, I was off that day, so I was not near a computer. But I did see some of the faces on this show right now on the launch party talking about what everybody's excited about.
Yeah, so that was awesome. And I also wasn't on there for the whole day or as much as I would have liked to be. I had, calls, so I was jumping on and off. But I will say that the organization of it and the content was really great because it was kind of like small 10-minute digestible pieces. And like when I would jump in, I'd always like grab like a piece of something that I was like, oh, that's cool. Really got me excited for Drupal 10. And yeah, I think Leslie was actually there. Were you there for most of the day, Leslie?
Yeah, I was there for all the entire day. So yeah, it was really, really good. Very well organized. The presenters all did a really good job. The people that were hosting it. So yeah, I thought it was a big success.
Yeah, it was great. Go ahead, Avi.
No, I hopped on at the beginning and then at the end. I ended up doing an impromptu presentation on some of the work we've been doing for the Y at the end because they were just like people were still hanging out. But yeah, it was like 150 people on the call, like almost the whole day, which I was super impressed with. It was really cool.
Yeah, unfortunately, the sessions were not recorded, but I think that's fine. That content will pop up in other places as Drupal 10 becomes more prevalent and out there in the world.
And we also have a note this week from Nerd Summit. If you're in the New England area and you're interested in general technology, hope to see you at Nerd Summit. It used to be the Western Mass Drupal Camp, and a few years ago transitioned to being a little bit broader and becoming the Nerd Summit.
Hi, my name is Jen. Are you a nerd? Yep, me too. And I want to make sure you know about Nerd Summit, an inclusive community building tech event held each March here in New England. I work in software development, but I'm actually not a developer. And what I really love about Nerd Summit is the wide variety of professions and experience levels that are represented. I don't have a formal development education, but I really felt comfortable enough at the summit to give my first ever tech-related presentation at a Nerd Summit a couple years ago, and I had a really good experience. For the March 2023 Nerd Summit, the squad of volunteer summit organizers have booked the venue, which is UMass Amherst, picked out yummy lunch menus, and have scheduled 2 really cool keynotes, but we still need more content. Nerd Summit content consists of sessions that are presented by nerds just like you. Proposals for sessions are being accepted now through January 15th, and first-time presenters are definitely welcome. The types of sessions you can propose are talks, panels, and group discussions, and can be on any number of topics, including, but not at all limited to WordPress, Drupal, programming, design, project management, hardware, maker projects, and so much more. Visit nerdsummit.org, that's nerdsummit.org, for more information and to sign up for our Slack and newsletter. Submit your session proposal now, and then join us at Nerd Summit at UMass Amherst in Amherst, Massachusetts, March 17th through 19th in 2023. Nerd Summit is a great place to share your passions with other nerds. So come share your passion and share your knowledge. Check us out at nerdsummit.org.
And thank you for that. And now to talk to us about the module of the week, we have Martin Anderson-Klutz, Senior Solutions Engineer, Acquia, maintainer of a number of Drupal modules of his own. Martin, what have you found for us this week?
So this week, we're going to be talking about the Previous Next API, which provides a performant way to define a sequence of content. That's a module that was originally created back in 2009 by Kay Bahi, who's actually one of my early Drupal mentors. The current version is 8.x 2.0-alpha 3, which supports Drupal 8, 9, and 10. And that version was released on November 22nd of 2022, so quite recently. I would say over the years, it's probably been semi-sporadically maintained, but in terms of open issues, it currently has 38 open, but only 11 of which are actually for the current version, and only 5 of those are bugs. It's in use by over 2,300 websites, and the current maintainer looks to be JCN Ventura of 1X Internet, who is a pretty prolific Contrib maintainer in his own right. So the module really works by providing a block that contains previous and next links to let a user kind of navigate within that sequence of content. It has some options in terms of how it will sequence that content. You can sort of define that. But it's also worth noting that the module that we're talking about today has a machine name of sort of, prev underscore next. And there's actually a similar module that is basically the same machine name, but without the underscore. Probably some significant overlap there. That one is different in the sense that it provides the same kinds of links, but really as a field that would be on the entity that you want to sequence. I think there's also a fair bit of overlap with some modules that provide, I would say, more manual control over how you would define a sequence of content. So something like, an entity queue or draggable views. But this one, I think, is more focused in terms of, what it's trying to accomplish and sort of, it seems like it probably does a little bit more out of the box. Now, Nick, I think you had originally nominated this one. Why don't you tell us about your experience of using it?
Yeah, it's a pretty nifty little module. It has a service that allows you to request what the next one is. So it's really easy to integrate with your theme if you want to do something kind of unique with it. I have a client that has a bunch of different case studies on their site, and they wanted to have a link to the next case study at the bottom of the page. And I started thinking about how I would implement that. And of course, you could use the book module, which really seemed like overkill for that use case because it wasn't hierarchical content. Literally, it was just like next. You could use something like entity queue, but then you have like where does that live? I could build something custom. So I decided to just do a quick search, found this module, and because it had it has the ability to restrict it also to individual content types and no bundles. So you can say like, yeah, it turns out that we also needed it on blogs, the previous and next on the blog. So we can have the blogs indexed and the case studies indexed separately. And the nice thing about it is that it essentially is just creating a table in the database that's an indexed list of what the next entity is. So it's really performant. The only kind of oddity that I found is that when I pull a production database down to my local, for some reason it doesn't work until I resave the content, which I haven't had a chance to dig into, and I don't quite understand why that would happen because the node IDs are the same in production as my local. But it was a small utility module. It took me maybe 20 minutes to figure out how to integrate the service manually in the theme file. And once you get the node ID, you can do whatever you normally would do to pull fields that you need to build that block. Now, if you just need kind of the out of the box block, you can use that as well. But we had slightly different designs in mind, so we use that instead. But yeah, all in all, great little module. Pretty easy to. I might be contributing something back to force drush to give a drush command to allow you to kind of reindex, because like I said, it if you just have a couple pieces of content, you can go resave them. But once you get to like 10 or 15 or even 20 or thousands, it's difficult to go through and resave every single one. So I'm looking to contribute that back probably in the next few weeks.
Yeah, that sounds great. I feel like there are probably use cases as well where people don't actually want to change that updated date, which is going to be a consequence of actually resaving the nodes. So being able to do that via Drush, I think, would be a nice addition for sure.
Yep. And the service has a separate method for adding, updating, or deleting things from the index. And so the drush command really just needs to call the update method on all the content that's relevant. And I think the code's there. It just needs to be moved to a drush a drush command. So I don't know how it would work for thousands and thousands of modules, but I think they do the actual index on cron, so it shouldn't be a problem. Well, thank you, Martin, for bringing us this module of the week. And I will say that the other module, I think, is a little bit more restricted. The reason why I mentioned that too is because I did, when I was trying to raise the issue with the production database being different, I think I created the issue on the wrong one, not realizing it was different. So if you're looking for it, one of them has an underscore, one of them doesn't. One of them has API in the name, one of them doesn't. So the one I'm using has API in the name, has the underscore, but feel free to check out the other one if you have different needs as well. So thank you, Martin, and now on to our primary topic. Okay, Avi. So let's start with we did previously talk about the EOWG on episode 222, but it's been a couple of years. I'm curious, Avi, what is the EOWG?
Sure. Yeah. So the stated definition, the Event Organizer Working Group, is a Drupal initiative that supports community-led teams to grow Drupal through local events. And really, what that means is, we're a group of event organizers who are trying to help each other make better events and kind of raise the bar and lower the barrier to entries for new folks.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of different types of events, but I think a lot of this, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of this started with people organizing local Drupal camps. But I think it's grown a little bit since then, right?
Yeah, and so there was like a lot of discussion about what an event was when we first formed this, and really, it definitely formed around camps. But the idea was to support anybody doing a volunteer-led event. So that's basically everything that's not DrupalCon. so camps, summits, training days, contribution days, meetups. The idea is anything that you don't have paid staff to organize, we want to help you. We want to help folks get it done.
So can you give us kind of a brief history of how this initiative and this working group came to be? I mean, it's a relatively new initiative and working group, right? So, give our listeners an idea of kind of how it formed and how it kind of got started.
Sure. Yeah. I need to write this down at somewhere in a more cohesive manner, because I feel like I'm always researching our history. Before there was an official event organizer working group, we often had these roundtables at DrupalCon, and every year, I started organizing MidCamp around 2014. I started with the MidCamp team around 2014, so similar to other discussions that I had when I was in higher ed or whatever, we would kind of go off and do our things for most of the year, and then come back, and DrupalCon would be like, oh my gosh, we want to talk about everything in 2 days, 3 days. So there were a number of roundtables that happened. At some point, Rachel Lawson, who was at the Drupal Association, helped organize one. I think it was in Nashville in 2018. That kind of really sparked the idea of making something more formalized. After that, Kaleem Clarkson, he wrote some blog posts. He did his Kaleem thing and got folks together, and it was super. So we kind of gathered a core group of folks. we wrote a charter, we ran it by folks, we got it approved by Dries and the association. And so I think in the summer of 2019, we officially formed the group. And then, 2020 happened, and things have been different since then. But we're still evolving and figuring out how we can help and what our value is in the space. Yeah.
Just to give folks insight, right? And the reason I said it's a newer group, right? So it was, the board was formed in 2019, right? And the charter says that people have 2-year terms, right? So Kaleem was the first president, right? And you took over
Correct.
from him last year, if I remember correctly, right?
Indeed.
And so in its lifetime, we're only really on our second set of board members at this point, right? And there have been a few different board members. Some of them are still with us in advisory roles, right? And
many of them are on the call right now.
Many of them are on the call right now. So for those folks that don't know, if you go to the event organizers working group page on Drupal.org, Leslie and I are both board members with Avi right now. So there's a large portion of the event organizers working group represented right here on this podcast.
All right. So
we need like a bunker or something so that we're,
Avi, what are some of the initiatives that the event organizers working group is currently working on? I know we've had different ones over the years since we first formed, but what are the current ones?
Yeah. So the two big initiatives that are active right now, the first is the Drupal.org events page. So that's the page that you see at Drupal.org/community/events. And that has been kind of, I feel like the flagship initiative, the flagship initiative of the event organizer working group. Yes, of the group. And the goal with this was to have a consolidated resource of all of these events across the world. There'd been a number of services that kind of did that over time. There was DrupalCon, which still exists, but now directly pulls from this data. DrupalCon before was kind of a conglomeration of stuff on groups.drupal.org and other places and user submitted stuff. And that team has been amazing over the years at keeping that resource going, but it was still kind of very disparate data. So the idea with this is to get all of the data about Drupal events into one consolidated location. I think I meant to pull up my math. I did some like back of the envelope math a few years ago when we were working on this, and it was something like 10,000 people a year are involved in these events. It's like looking at the very incomplete data we had. There's a huge amount of this going on in the world, and so being able to leverage the giant amount of community-led events to grow Drupal and to build consistently as a project was something that we really wanted to do. So anyway.
Yep. Can I add one real quick thing there? I think one of the things of the events page on Drupal.org was there wasn't a place on Drupal.org for folks that weren't already in the community to find out about events. So this made it front and center so that people that were just learning about Drupal, go to Drupal.org, and one of the things you can find is all these local events that you can attend. And that's how a lot of people start out in the Drupal community, and that's how they find out about the community and stay with it. So I think putting it there was very important.
One of the things that somebody found early on was when you install WordPress. I don't know if it's still true, but at some point when you installed WordPress, there was like a little block that you got on the install admin page that was like, here are local WordPress things going on near you. As this data evolves, it has an API already. If somebody wanted to put that module out there, that would be really cool too. So we could even push this content further. And that's the goal of this, is when, if you don't have structured data, you can't do things with it. So the more structured data we have, the better we're able to market this stuff as a whole.
So that initiative, and funny, Leslie and I were kind of co-maintaining that initiative, or co-leading that initiative. And it started off as, I think its original name was like the Drupal.org event database initiative or something like that. It was really oddly named to what we were trying to do. But I think, Avi, you raised a great point there, that like getting that data on Drupal.org, having that central place for folks to find event information is super important. Also, being able to share that data, right, is important for a bunch of different event related things. But there are other initiatives, right, that the EOWG is working on. One of which is the event platform. We had Kaleem and Martin on not too long ago to talk about that. That was in episode 365. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah, definitely. Episode 365 was a good one. The events platform is basically a recipe distribution. It's kind of evolving as that idea is evolving with Drupal 10. But the goal is to have to solve the cobbler's children have no shoes situation, where in organizing a Drupal event, often organizers get stuck on making a website, which is kind of funny. And in trying to find a venue and trying to get speakers and trying to do all this stuff, making a website is just one of those things that's often been a challenge for events. So trying to build a platform that's reproducible, that's easy to spin up, that's customizable, so that organizers have one fewer thing to worry about, that's been a really neat initiative to see going on. So Kaleem was working on that. Mike Herschel was involved. Martin, I think, has been involved for a while. And so, yeah, it's.
I was gonna say you can listen back to that episode for more detail. But one of the things too is it's also not, of course, not everybody, but a lot of people working on organizing these camps do have building, Drupal site building experience or development experience or design experience. But one of the things too is these sites, even though they're smaller regional events generally, have a lot of complexity. You have to have some sort of registration. You have to have some sort of ticket system. You have to have some sort of way to schedule content. Like there's a lot of functionality that goes into that, and a lot of architectural decisions that, depending on how you go year to year, have huge impacts. And so taking a lot of that burden and moving that to kind of a centralized place where people can contribute some of their fixes or needs back to other camps, I mean, that's a huge responsibility that camp organizers can now rely on. And like I said, if it's maintained by a central place, it makes it much easier to contribute that kind of stuff back. So, camp in Florida, if they make a tweak to it, they can contribute that back, and mid-camp can use it. And then, each camp happens kind of different times of the year too, so you can kind of start getting feedback and improvements throughout the year. But we definitely dive in pretty deep into kind of the needs of that platform. If you're curious as to why, it's not just building a Drupal site, putting up and saying, hey, here's where the camp is, here's the schedule. There's a lot that goes into maintaining one of those websites.
I will say Nick is very familiar with how much goes into that, because he's that person for the New England Drupal camp. So he is speaking from a place of experience.
So is New England Drupal camp thinking about using the new events platform sometime?
Well, that is a goal for 2023.
John has committed me to it, so it's a goal.
Nice.
We will. I'm going to start looking at it, I think, in a couple of months. So we've talked. It's kind of the spiel I just gave on websites kind of exists in general for the whole camp, right? Again, if you're just somebody who's attended camps, you kind of have a small glimpse into the amount of work that goes into them. And it's not, again, it's not just about finding location, finding people to speak there. There's a lot of stuff that goes on that, if you haven't run one, you might not think about. For example, you have to have insurance. There's a contract with the venue. You have to find out, you have to find food and make sure you have food that covers a wide range of dietary needs and allergies. There's a ton of stuff that goes into it. Um, not even talking about the financial aspect, getting sponsorships or funding. What kind of support does the EOWG look to provide to people running events or thinking about running an event throughout the year?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you really hit the nail on the head. And one of the things, one of the initiatives that we have worked on, kind of before the EOWG was official and ongoing, is some documentation around all of that too. I put the link in the show notes, and I think it'll go out. But the documentation team worked really hard to put together a ton of notes that we generated over a couple of years on organizing a Drupal camp. It's in the Drupal contributor guide, and there are dozens and dozens of like parent pages with every single thing going into it. So there's tons and tons of stuff there, and that's kind of the goal of the EOWG, is to be an advisory group to get all this information together. So we are, so we are not, we're not like a local Drupal association, like some of the ones that exist in Europe, where we're kind of doing promotion and financial support for those events. But our goal is to facilitate the conversation between event organizers, and help in that direction.
So it sounds to me like and I have a further clarification question too, but it sounds to me like one of the purposes of EOWG isn't organizing events themselves. It's providing tools for people to organize those events and and the lessons learned. So for example, like, here's the things you might not have thought about if you're just starting this out. Here's the pitfalls. Here's the do's and don'ts. And then, as best as we can, here's some tools that you can use, like the event platform, to not have to spend the 100 hours, 150 hours, or 200 hours it takes to build a website. You can use this as a starting point, and maybe you just use Olivero out of the box, and the theme out of the box, and maybe next year you change that. But you're able to kind of modularly, like, here's the things you need to know to run the camp or start a camp. We have 15 years of experience running camps, around the country, around the world, and this is what you need to get started. But it's not like, hey, we're going to do a camp here, let's organize that camp, right?
Yeah, it's really like a resource, right? So like it's also about connections too. So like if somebody's coming into the event organizer Slack and saying, hey, I need help, recording my camp, right? We're like, oh, well, you could talk to Kevin. Kevin knows all about that. Like, he's the guy. Or, if you needed help from somebody in the community, like it's also about connections. So like the EOWG and is always there to try to help connect folks to the resources that they need. So, I think that's, the way you put it, Nick, is really a perfect way of summarizing it.
So I did have one more question about kind of the support side of things, because you mentioned it's not providing financial support, but there are kind of two sides to financial support. One is, some people might expect the EOWG will just give money to local camps, which it does not. But there's also the financial support side of things, of just like having a bank account to manage the money. And I know that that's something that NedCamp has spent a lot of effort, and recently I think has a good solution working with the organizers of Nerd Summit to help manage some of that stuff. But it is, if you're running a camp, you don't want the money going into somebody's just personal account, right? It just makes accountability, it makes taxes, it makes a lot of stuff really complicated. But it's a big ask to have somebody set up a bank account too, separate. Like, is there any plan for the EOWG to have some sort of support on that end of the financial game for camps, or is that going to be left up to camp organizers?
Yes, I can answer your question. No, there is not a plan to do that. Yeah. No, I mean, you're right. It's a really complicated question. It's also different everywhere. Doing it in the US is different from doing it in Canada, is different from doing it in Europe and anywhere else in the world. And so, especially trying to exist as a global support network, there are a lot of different questions around that. Just specifically in the US, we have a couple kind of these recipes, of these like documentation of how to go about going down these paths, and I think that is the biggest thing that we can do to support these, because it really is. We're a volunteer advisory board, like you said.
Yep.
These things are a lot of work, and so MidCamp is running with we basically created our own organization too, called the Midwest Open Source Alliance. There you got Nerd. There are a couple of these around. A lot of folks are going back to Open Collective to run their finances. And Open Collective seems to be growing more and more resources around that as well. So yeah, it's a challenging thing. And like I said, we are supporting folks in choosing a direction. But we can't. We don't have the facility to do that. I know with outside the US, the local Drupal associations sometimes act as those fiscal agents, but the Drupal, the way things work in the US has been different for, I think, a variety of reasons. Partly because the US is the US, and we're gigantic.
I think also, you hit that. I mean, the Drupal Association did have a program like this for a short amount of time, and they had to end that because, I mean, every country is different. Every state can be different. And so I think that the EOWG kind of struck a good balance there, saying like each camp can kind of say, here's how we did it, right? With the disclaimer, this isn't financial or legal advice, right? You still have to do your own due diligence and make sure that you're complying with local requirements. But it can give you the idea like, oh, this is the type of person I need to talk to make sure that I'm doing this correctly and make sure that I'm in compliance. But yeah, it's a monumental task to make sure that you are running a compliant thing across every country in the world and that state in the country.
That's actually something that different board members, different members of the EOWG can advise on in different areas, right? So I know I've had camps reach out to me before about working with Kelly at New England Regional Developers about fiscal sponsorship and that sort of thing, which is the way that I know Ned Camp goes, or New England Drupal Camp goes. I know Design for Drupal goes with Nerd as well. Organizations like Avi's and Matthew Saunders, who's on the show a couple of weeks ago, in Colorado, they actually formed their own nonprofit. So the board has resources that they can connect people with to talk through those options and kind of guide them as far as what makes the most sense. I think Colorado, MidCamp have both been happening for a long period of time, right? So they're established camps. It's a little bit, I won't say easier for them, but they have the history to be able to say, hey, we want to be self-sustaining. We want to be financially independent and have these mechanisms in place to be able to support this camp, right, long term. I think for camps starting out, like you probably may want to go with like an existing solution, right? To kind of take that burden off of you for a little bit to be able to see if you can get the wheels going. Avi, would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree. I mean, just kind of thinking through that as you're talking, it seems like a natural set of stepstones right now. Like going from zero, starting with something like Open Collective is a really great way. They've made a platform that's super turnkey. They do all of the kind of fiscal agency. They hold your money. They help with some of the accounting things, I think. And that really can get you really far. There's some things that you don't get with that, and I haven't dug into Open Collective yet, but I know, for instance, like Google Workspace and Slack, in order to get those on your own, you have to have an individual EIN, like a tax number, which is something that you only get if you are running your own 501c3. But then once you kind of take that step, you have to figure out your accounting, you have to get bank accounts, you have to, you have a whole another layer of overhead that you're getting into. Yeah. So yeah.
And it is a large amount of overhead, but it also is one of the, and sometimes people just want to put that kind of stuff off, but you really do need that. Running an event like this carries a fair amount of liability, right? So if if somebody gets hurt, or somebody gets sick or something like that at one of your events, so you want to make sure that you have the right structures in place to best protect the event and the attendees and the organizers. So there's a lot of overhead.
Turning this topic back to the topic, you can see based on that conversation that financial support is very complicated, and the EOWG would rather advise folks to use the mechanisms that exist as opposed to setting up their own and managing their own thing. So very much an advisory board, and at least where financial support comes into it, right? So some of our listeners may have recently seen the community initiative, the Contrib events community initiative, right? And that's different from the EOWG and what they do. Can you talk a little bit about that, Avi, and kind of highlight what the differences are there?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk from my side and from our side about the EOWG, but I think the events, the Contrib events, the Contrib events initiative is still kind of in the early phases, and it's a really interesting group. And so, like we've said, the EOWG is kind of gathering existing organizers together to help each other and to help new organizers, and to be kind of a meta organization, right? We help folks do the things, we don't do the things. The Contrib Events initiative, from what I understand, is taking a much more direct approach and directly facilitating contribution initiatives, from my understanding. I don't want to say too much about it because I've only kind of been on the periphery, but it seems like they're helping organize. They are starting some initiatives to help raise funds, and so it's going to be really interesting to see how that evolves, because I think they could play a very complementary role to the EOWG. Yeah, and so they're very active conversations ongoing, like probably now as I'm getting pings.
I think one clear distinction there to make is like the event organizers working group is a air quotes official initiative, right, from with the Drupal Association and whatnot. The Contrib events is a community initiative, so it's very much a community-led initiative that is really really taking off. Leslie, I know that you've been talking to them quite a bit. Is there anything that you'd like to add there?
I think they're very complementary. Again, they're just in their infancy. They're just starting out. I think one thing that's important to note here is that the events page on Drupal.org has always and will always have a section for the contribution events. Contributing is huge to Drupal. It's very important. So the work that new initiative is doing is great. But they have been adding the events that they're supporting, that they're running to the community events section on Drupal.org, so on the events page. So I would recommend that people that are interested in contributing in any way, whether it's a camp having a Contrib day or the community events initiative running a Contrib event, we support that by having that presence on the events page. All right. So jumping to another topic is what does the event organizers working group have planned for 2023, which we're almost
Sure.
in.
Yeah. No, I think we have it's been a weird couple of years coming out of the pandemic, existing as the pandemic evolves, however you want to state that. But yeah, I think as people go back to having more in-person events, I think it's going to be interesting to see how we can continue to evolve what we do. So we do, we were talking in the pre-show a little bit. We are going to have an election, I think, in the next few months to get new officers involved, and so refiguring that out. As we talked about, a big thing is going to be kind of figuring out how we fit in with a lot of these other initiatives that are happening. The Contrib Events Initiative, Promote Drupal has also been doing a ton of work in the past few years. And so we want to continue to build these relationships and keep the ties. As Drupal sometimes feels like it's growing out in all these different directions. And so making sure we're keeping tabs on those and continuing the conversations is a big part of that. Another thing that we have struggled with, I think, since we've kind of formed, is that we started with a core group in North America, and we keep trying to figure out ways to grow the group outside of North America. We've had a couple folks on the board, and we pretty strongly want to make sure that the board is not just North American folks, but because of time differences and because of just the structural the way events are structured in North America and in the US versus the rest of the world, I think there have been some barriers there. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, we want to do what you want to do. If you're an event organizer and you want to do something different with your event or with events in general, we want you to be involved, because if it's just the five of us trying to figure stuff out, we're not going to be very effective.
Right. And to add to that, there is a board, as Avi mentioned. We'll be voting for new officers there. But there are members of the board. So if you want to, join the board at some point, start coming to the meetings, start, maybe you start on the advisory board, find out what it's about. And then, the board has a couple different, I think there's some 2-year and 3-year positions, so that not everybody drops off. I'm sorry, the board, so not everybody drops off at the same time. We have some continuity of board members. But yeah, we definitely would like some global folks involved. I spoke to the local association. They had like a BOF in Prague. There was a lot of people there from the global community, and there was a lot of interest in, folks joining. But that hasn't really happened. So how we do better marketing, how we get those folks involved, any input from anybody listening would be, much appreciated, because there are folks in all over the place looking to start new meetups, start new camps, and
Yep.
talking to folks in their areas is the best thing for them to do. We have resources, but we don't know the dynamics of the individual places or countries that you're in. So yeah, any help there would be great. So last question on this topic, Avi, what do you have planned for the Event Organizers Working Group in 2023?
What do I have planned for the Event Organizers Working Group?
As president.
As president? No, I mean, I want to keep us going. I think as we talked about, as John mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, we're still a relatively new organization and we're still figuring things out. Going through the pandemic and kind of being, I've led both MidCamp and the EOWG through the pandemic, and it's been a weird time, and it's also been kind of exhausting. And so, continuing to build succession plans in both of those organizations, I think I've seen more and more organizations and local businesses, everything just kind of fall apart and shut down because they don't have succession plans going on. So my biggest plan is to get out of being in charge so that somebody else can be in charge and we can keep the ball rolling.
So speaking of getting involved, Leslie mentioned a couple of ways with the advisory board, but I'm curious if somebody wants to get involved, not on the advisory board or on the actual committee or board of directors itself, but just wants to start attending meetings, or they're thinking of running a camp locally and getting one started. How do they get involved? How do they get this information?
That's a great question, Nick. So we've got lots of information on Drupal.org/community/event organizers. And we try to keep that updated with all of the meetings and all of the places you can get in touch with us. Most of us are on Slack all the time. So we have event-organizers channel in the Drupal Slack. That is where we have consolidated a lot of the conversations about event organizing, not just stuff about the board, but really that's meant to be the place that's easily accessible for everybody to come and ask us questions. There is a separate event organizer Slack that we've kind of moved away from a little bit for our board stuff, but it's still there for people to have conversations. And then we have meetings. So we've been experimenting with open meetings on Slack. And so those are the second Tuesday of every month at noon Eastern, US Eastern. And then we also have quarterly in-person Zoom calls that, if I copy and pasted correctly, are the second Tuesday of the month in January, April, July, and October. So again, we're still kind of experimenting with the best way to involve folks. If you have feedback on that, let us know. But all of that is on d.o/community/event-organizers.
Right. And for those of you who may not have been on an asynchronous Slack meeting before, the idea behind that is instead of having a Zoom call at a certain time that globally folks aren't able to join because it's the middle of the night for them, for instance, the Slack call, we leave them open for at least 24 hours where you can look at the threads and add your input or add your questions or whatever it might be. So the conversation continues for a full day around, so it covers everybody around the globe. So that's why we switched to that with the thought that we could get new people involved and make it more accessible to everybody.
Yeah, and you're totally welcome to just lurk there too. Like if you just want to read the conversation, it's all in Slack. It's really easy to see. So yeah.
So we've talked about board members. There are 3 board members on the podcast right now, right? And we've talked about elections coming up in the next year, right? So if somebody's sitting and listening to this and they're wondering how they get involved to kind of be nominated or be able to become a board member, how does somebody go about doing that?
Sure. I think the best thing for somebody like that to do would be to just start showing up to meetings. Either join on Slack or join on one of our calls. And just start talking to us. We're relatively friendly. We're pretty open. We want folks to come talk to us. But yeah, like if you want to be involved, we would love to have you. So get in touch with us in any of the ways that are on the website or on here, and we'll loop you in. There is also we have our kind of board seats, and then we also have an arbitrary number of advisory positions on the board. So if you're interested in kind of getting involved in the deeper conversations, but not committing to a seat yet, we can kind of loop you into more conversations and keep you a little bit flexible.
And that's actually how I became a board member. So I was on the advisory board for the first 2 years, and then was elevated, was pulled in. I don't know what the appropriate term is, but I was added. We'll go with that one, to the board in the most recent term. So that's a great way to kind of figure out what's going on and maybe get into a board seat if that's something you want to do.
Very good. Another quick one, Avi. DrupalCon Pittsburgh is coming up in June. Are there any
Wait, what? Just kidding.
Are there any events planned around the event organizers working group that folks could look out for and become involved with?
Well, I sure hope so. We did submit. The last few years we've done a panel discussion about events and kind of focused on different topics around events. We submitted that again this year, so hoping that gets accepted, but we won't hear for another few months. Also, every DrupalCon we have BOFs, we have discussions. We try, once the sessions are announced, to put out an email with like a whole list of DrupalCon stuff related to event organizing. So if you join our email list, which is on the website, we'll have that list out closer to DrupalCon. But I'm excited. It's the closest. It's going to be pretty close to where I grew up. So I'm looking forward to getting back to the East Coast and hanging out in Pittsburgh.
We've even talked about, I don't know if this is for public release, but I'm gonna talk about it, and we'll see what happens. We've even talked about maybe doing a community event, like an event organizers working group community event. So if you're listening to this and you work for an organization that would like to sponsor a community event with the EOWG, feel free to reach out to one of the members, and we can start that conversation.
It'd be super fun.
Shameless self-promotion, Avi. Shameless self-promotion.
That's what it's all about.
Is there anything else you'd like to add for our listeners?
Well, speaking of shameless self-promotion.
And amazing segues.
The MidCamp call for speakers and sponsors is open. MidCamp is happening April 26th through 28th, 2023. We just opened our call for speakers, and we would love to have you. MidCamp is always a great place to to prepare or practice your DrupalCon talk if you get accepted, or just to kind of start talking, get your feet wet in the public speaking realm. So we'd love to have you at MidCamp. Go to midcamp.org for more information, and it's going to be a fun time.
As I understand it, is going to be a warmer MidCamp this time around, right?
I mean, theoretically, it's going to be later. I cannot tell you whether April in Chicago will or will not be warmer than March in Chicago, but we're hoping so. So yeah, usually we do MidCamp end of March, but since DrupalCon is going to be late this year, we took advantage of the time and pushed back a month.
Well, Avi, thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for having me.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo. And maybe, Avi, that's something that you can put out on the EOWG, that if people want to promote it, this is one of the channels.
Totally.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter for show news, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choose Become a Patron. Well, Avi, as we close out the show, if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, have any additional questions, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. I am at AJ Schwab on Twitter. I've got a Mastodon. It's froboy at mastodon.online, I believe. Yes, froboy at mastodon.online. And pretty much everywhere else, I'm at froboy on Drupal Slack, on GitHub, all of those places.
And Leslie, thank you again for joining us as guest host for the last 4 weeks. If our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Thanks for having me as a guest host. You can go Leslie G on Drupal.org or pretty much anywhere on the Slacks. And I just want to quickly just thank Redfin Solution for sponsoring or helping sponsor my work, my community work. So I appreciate that.
And John, how about you?
You can find me on all the major social networks, including Mastodon, at John Picozzi. And you can find out about EPAM at epam.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at NixVan, NICXVAN.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. Thank you.
See you guys next week.
Have a good one, everyone.